Hello, everyone. I can see no one, so I hope you all can hear me. Now I can see faces. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Meet Your Uni event series. As many of you might already know, we started this event series last winter semester. So this is the second season of Meet Your Uni. We're having 3 events starting today. The second one will be on the 14th of April and the third one on the 5th of May. The event series Meet Your Uni is organized by the IR group, which is the PhD group of the Faculty of Architecture at the University of Innsbruck. And it is an attempt to create a platform where dialogue would take place more transversally inside our faculty. So we're trying to actually overcome the thresholds of the single institutes and also the hierarchies, and bring people together to share their work and also their visions. And like our big hope is that this would also trigger like more informal dialogue among students and teaching staff, like as a post-event effect. So kind of compared to last semester, this time, besides professors and members of the Mittelbau, assistants and PhD candidates, we have also invited students either finishing their masters or like fresh or recent graduates. These 3 events, like last semester, are curated by Gonzalo Vaillo from the Hochbau Institute and myself, Florina Popp, from the History and Theory department. So back to tonight's event, we have 3 guests whom I will briefly introduce, and then I will leave the floor to them to give us an insight into their work. And this will be followed by a dialogue between our guests, and the public is invited to intervene with questions. And the whole discussion will be moderated by Gonzalo. So now I'll start with the introductions. Rupert Maleczek is an architect and researcher and digital consultant, currently working as a senior scientist at the ISD, which is the Institute of Structure and Design of the University in Innsbruck. In his multidisciplinary work, he explores the relation between form, structure, performance, materiality, and digital as well as physical production. He is leading the cross-disciplinary research project Fold to Bend that investigates the relation of computational design, wood construction, thin plate material, digital fabrication, and structural origami. In the research project Foam Smart Slitting, he investigates the realization of complex geometries with the manipulation of cores from sandwich panels. Our second guest is Andreas Körner, who is an architectural designer and researcher based in Innsbruck. He received his Bachelor of Science at TU Wien and his master's degree from UCL in London. Andreas has been teaching at various architecture faculties across Europe and gained practice experience in London, Vienna, and Salzburg. After teaching at Oxford Brookes, he is currently committed to his doctoral thesis at the University of Innsbruck, and besides that, he's teaching at besides teaching in Innsbruck at the Institut für Experimentelle Architektur Hochbau, he is also teaching environmental design strategies in the Bio-Integrated Design program at Bartlett. His research and design experiments explore the relationship between the built and the natural environment through layering, materials, and environmental simulations. Special interest is given to the impact of weather on surfaces and their textural articulations. And the third guest, Mümün Keser, is an architecture graduate based in Innsbruck, interested in speculative art and computational design. He got his bachelor and master's degrees in Innsbruck and is currently a lecturer at the Institute of Experimental Architecture and Building Construction. In addition to this, he also works as a freelance designer, educator, and artist. His interests lie in data-driven design techniques and experimental investigations, and his most recent works are mainly concerned with bringing media into architectural expression and creating fully immersive and adaptive hyperspaces based on the user. During his studies and career, he also held workshops in architectural design, computational design, storytelling, and visualization. So I hope this was not too long. I will now leave the floor to our guests. Thank you again for joining us tonight. And Rupert, the floor is yours.
Thank you for your introduction. So I need to share my screen if it's the right one. So I hope you see what I see. So yeah, thank you again for the introduction. Well, seems like I'm since a very long time at this faculty now. I guess everyone knows the institute where I'm working, so I will not present too closely. I will try to give a little bit of insight what drives me and what is my research aim, or why am I doing certain things. It turned out that 15 minutes is a short amount of time to explain what you try to do in a faculty, or what drives you in your research. So, well, I maybe start with this. So basically, I guess my research and my practice and my teaching, this is all overlapping fields. So there's no clear boundary in between these things. So I love to teach. I love to build. All these things. I'm really enjoying doing these things. So from computational methods to work with real materials as wood or paper or whatever it is. So it's difficult to draw a clear boundary between that. So also the things I will show today is probably more research based, but just to show, I'm really happy if I can work with students and build something. So maybe some of you might remember the last one we was built together with students in the first year. I was able to teach a course together with Stefan Rutzinger, and we built this paper tower just with students. And the right one, that's a really old project, that's from my PhD, that is a tower in cardboard. So, but what else can you do with cardboard? So sometimes it happens that last autumn I was able to order $10,000 for a museum project, and so just doing an entire museum exhibition space to like work on the topic. So the topic was like forgetting, and these boxes are still in use in the museum as such. So we took the advantage of buying something and have it still used in the museum. Or sometimes as a consultant, I was very happy to help the guys from Park Architect to build up this pavilion in Kirchdorf in Tyrol. So I was there just trying to help a little bit out with folding, which is probably, as you will see, one of my main topics, because it's a very good field, because it's very complex and it has many insights on fabrication, on holistic approaches to architecture and fabrication. So in general, I'm dealing with, and what I'm interested in is all these things. It's computation, design, geometry, structure, materials, scalability, fabrication, so many more things. So what everyone tries to do is probably this. So I'm also trying to have this single slider control on everything. So you have just one idea, but we all know how it really looks like. We have this slide problem. So one way to control that would be you pack it into a container. So basically, what I'm trying to do is a simplification of complex things, and then just put them together, and some things are running in the background so you can understand them, but not everything needs to be obvious or filled out. So simplification is something I'm really happy to do, or trying to understand systems and make them simple. So if you think of that in a building process, that was paper pavilion, I'm showing a bit more of that later. We did it in the old institute together with Günther Filz and Chris Schreiber and Moritz Heimrath and Clemens Preisinger. So I guess all these things that I'm doing have, if you look at it, so this a fabrication scheme, there's a structural scheme, there's a formal scheme all together. So all these things are interrelated. And in order to have control on such a system, I am working with something that is known as simplexity, and simplexity is a way to make complex things simple, as the name says, but I think it's also a method to generate and control complex informed systems. And if you simplify things, then I guess it's very important to note that sometimes imperfection comes up. And I don't think that imperfection is a problem, but as Nam Chun Paik was saying, when too perfect, God is angry. So in that terms, I think imperfection is sometimes a way of simplification and making things simpler also, because in architecture, everything must be as exact as it is in mathematics. So looking at complex informed systems, maybe something I discovered is origami, something that has very strict rules. So square sheet paper, three-dimensional shape that's made just through folding and sculpting techniques. And very important, so modern origami artists would say no cut, no glue, no markings on paper. So not sure if that's true for architects, but why I like it so much is if you look at these things, so Yoshisawa Rendlet developed a system where you could just, through a simple language, see how the fold should be done. So all the knowledge that you have just giving in these instructional things. So what are architects doing? So architects are basically disrupting system. So I guess I'm not using a square of paper. I'm not using paper all the time. We do cuts, we glue, we mark. So all these things we are doing and kind of expanding the system by breaking the rules a little bit. Of course, I was not the first. So this is in classical Bauhaus education. Josef Albers did some classes for folding for the ability to learn material systems. And they did very interesting models and like a hands-on approach. Also developed already curved folded models. So there's lots of things you can discover in Josef Albers' work. But it is nowadays reviewed, for example, by Eric Demain and others, how these things really work. And some of the models, it's really difficult to classify them in a mathematical way. But I think for us as designers, it's very important that not everything must be mathematically defined. So if you look at these things, then basically I'm really interested in curved folding, because I guess curved folding is a huge advantage. So you can just replace straight folds, and as I said before, we cut, we glue. So having one long fold makes it easier to manipulate something, and you can be faster. So how can that be applied for architecture? So basically, the right technique, it is possible to generate a paper model and then really transfer this knowledge into another material, in this case, wood. So I guess this approach from a physical model through, of course, a digital model and a computational method behind it, but it has a huge potential. And of course, as said already, not the only one who's doing something, but I guess in 2016, there was an exhibition by Tomohiro Tachi in Japan. And in this exhibition, he brought people together that did something he named structural origami, and I guess it's really kind of describing of what I'm doing, trying to solve problems or trying to find applications for folding techniques that could be used in fabrication and design. So it turned out there's a group of people that meet every year to develop new models and to open up questions or try to answer new questions and so on. So basically what I am doing there, or what I'm trying to do there with, of course, with others, is to bring this technique to a different scale and see if it's true valid, if it has spatial qualities, and so on. Of course, what we are involved in, or what I'm interested in, is access to this knowledge. And sometimes it seems that, especially curved folding, is a very complex task. So what we're doing, or mainly what Clara Mundilova did, we're currently working on the development on a grasshopper component that can do curved folds, which is relatively new, besides of some kangaroo models where you could just distribute the error, which is, I think, a good strategy. But if you want to have a better and more correct handling of surfaces, then this component will probably do a good job. So basically what it's doing is it can simulate some paper foldings. It can transfer or fold developable surfaces into a cone or into a cylinder, which is very interesting. We had a course last semester where some students do demo testing or do bug reports, just try it out how it works. So I guess, I don't know, within a few weeks, we hopefully can publish this version or first version to see if other people are also interested in curved folding, or it's just us who think that other people are also interested. So getting back to this, why do I think it's bad for architecture? I guess there's one thing that means you can bring stuff directly to a site, for example, in flat state. We tried out this in a very simple attempt. So we just had these conical elements. We brought it to a site in France. And then just there, you could just fold it up by hand. It was a very simple process. Just with an advice how to do it, where to start and where to go. And then you could just, or the people there could, in a very fast way, fabricate and install this ceiling that is inside and outside. But I guess the important thing is that we learned that it works. So if you think of that in a big scale, then I don't know, maybe someone would come with a long strip of material and you could just fold it up, have something that you could work with. Of course, this particular structure has holes, so maybe a surface approach would be good. So there's lots of curved folding patterns. This one is particularly interesting. It's the so-called lens tessellation. Huffman was investigated by some more people, but what is important there, you see there is this height that forms a fold element. And well, Huffman was trying to, or was folding anti-surfaces. If you fold just parts of it, then you could assemble the folded parts and make something else out of it, formal way than just flat or arc-like sheets. So I'm very lucky that I have an industrial partner called Sauer in Reutte, which has this wonderful machine. They have a milling pathway of 48 meters, so probably difficult to find the right material in that length. But what is important is they always encouraged us to just give it a try, and they were very interested, and also were supporting the current research project. So, but in the first attempt, we just needed to see if you fold single individual elements and assemble them to a structure. So for the 50 years party of the company, we could do this. But of course, it did not answer the question if you could fold an entire part of a building, or for example, a bridge. So in 2019, we tried to do this. First, there's lots of geometry behind this. I will not go too deep into the detail. The only thing that is important that we replace some folding part with a slit or with a cut to have a faster assemble. And then, of course, it's made from different parts. There are a lot of milling times. It was like milled in, I guess, a day and assembled in a day. And then you have something like this. And well, just would like to show that if you have the right knowledge of a very complex system and you can simplify it in a very easy way, then it's possible to transfer knowledge, in this case from paper and geometry and origami, to a new way on building something. So the bridge was rather stable. Of course, in the end, we tested it and destroyed it. But I think to come back to the beginning, yeah, we try to, or I try to learn how to simplify things to make these things possible. And I guess I stop with this slide and hand over to Andy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rupert. Okay, so I also need to. Okay, I hope you can all see my screen. Otherwise, please someone shout. So I just have to move this here. All right, good. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Florina, for the great introduction. For the interesting lecture. It's hard to follow on that. So since I understood that this series is sort of not only about content, but also a bit about getting to know each other, I start with something personal right away. Very personal, actually. They say it's good to put an icebreaker in the beginning. And so this is me, almost exactly 29 years ago. It's a photo my dad took of me painting an Easter egg magnificently. And it's kind of all there already, sort of a fable for wobbly, complex shapes, color and drawing. And the only thing that I was not able to keep and develop, as I see, was my hair. Why do I show this picture? Well, it was taken at a campsite in a place called Punta Sabbioni, which is in northern Italy. And our parents took me and my sister there every Easter. The place is just 1 hour long ferry ride away from the city of Venice. So why Venice? Well, sort of in 2010, I was in my first year of studying architecture at TU Wien. And after realizing that my delusion of studying mechanical engineering was something I could not sustain long enough. So as the little brother back then, still am, but back then more, I went with my sister to the opening of the Austrian Pavilion at the Venice Architecture Biennale in 2010. And there I had, as we all do at Biennales, had a few very eye-opening experiences, I have to say. And I started to understand that architecture for me was much more important than I thought. I felt solid someday in what I'm doing. And there are also a few things that are by now very important to my understanding and fascination with architecture. Like in those pictures, I'm fascinated with architecture's ability to work with climate, environments, and weather for spatial purposes. So, At the backside of the Austrian pavilion, though, there was this exhibition of student work of a variety of schools. And I saw 3D prints before, I knew what it is, but never so many. And I was kind of mesmerized by the level of detail and the variety of idiosyncratic shapes that were possible using digital technology. And in the back of that picture, you then see actually work of the Angewandte, I think it's Studio Hadid in that case, which is a school that I later then spent a year as a student, made many friends and learned a lot. And in the foreground, you see work of Unit 20 at the Bartlett, which was back then run by Marcus Cruz and Marian Coletti. And they later became my teachers, and I owe them a lot. And somewhere in that exhibition, there was also this little model you see at the bottom right, which was, I was like, when going through my drive, I was like, I know this. And it's actually standing just a couple of meters away from me. It's from this faculty. From a bit of a while ago, but I found it really interesting how at that moment without knowing, I saw a glimpse of where I am now. After graduating then from the Bartlett in 2010, I started working at an architecture firm, sort of, graduate, the world is yours, in London. And but I also had the opportunity to start teaching with Barry Walk at Maria Knudsen Hull at the Oxford Brookes School of Architecture. And around 2017 then, I figured that I really enjoyed academia, and I sort of innocently started writing papers. So I also handed in at a symposium held with the Faculty of Architecture in Innsbruck. And back then, I do have to say, I did not know so much about Innsbruck, actually, funny enough. So I sort of got rejected, as you do in the beginning, but I remained curious. I timed my next flight from London to Salzburg via Innsbruck, and I checked out the faculty. So unfortunately, the symposium was having a break, and no one I knew was around there during these 30 minutes I had to spend there before I had to take my train. So back then already, there was Christina Schinniger and Stefan Rutzinger, who I knew from SOMA, the architecture practice, and Marian Coletti was a professor here who was my former tutor at the Bartlett. So I was like, okay, not accepted. I decided I've seen it all, and that I would never ever set a foot again into this building unless I was invited. Of course. Well, I did not get invited, but after a couple of applications and Brexit and so forth, I ended up doing a design studio at ISD, and then a position at Hochbau was opened and I applied. Well, now I sit right here, actually, funny enough. It's the only photo I took of that visit to Innsbruck. And I got a bit better at writing too, I think, at least. And I'm now, as mentioned in the introduction, an assistant at Hochbau while doing my PhD. As a student, I'm also a member of the transdisciplinary doctoral program Organizing the Digital, which spans across several faculties here. And as a lecturer, I'm part of the Designing Future Realities postgraduate program at University of Innsbruck. I currently teach also, as said before, at the Bartlett at Environmental Design, and I've done a couple of workshops here and there. So now being a researcher and trying a bit to follow up what we had as a discussion before with Rupert and Mümün, what it's about, I'm also sort of interested in these imperfections, as Rupert said before. I'm investigating the digital and material interfaces between the natural and the built environment. In my work, sort of focus lies on shapes, colors, climates, textures, and materials, to mention a few buzzwords, and that define those thresholds. I'm exploring both in theory and through applications using digital tools and workflows, which I think all three of us have in common. I work a lot with fragments and specimens. There's two terms I really started enjoying over the last years, and they're fabricated scale models and elements and parts. They're of textures and materials, of colors and shapes and layers. And I investigate what happens when you take digital shapes out of their high precision context, when you fabricate a smooth surface with a crude tool, when you observe them through different technological lenses, and the results then are reliefs, terrains, and landscapes, so there's a jump in scale. I furthermore hold a big interest in materials and new ways we have to investigate them using technology. May this be sort of thermal vision or machine learning, like this little experiment which is intended to find the color of Rome by feeding in hundreds of close-up photos from a field trip. So we went to that field trip with our bachelor students last year, just before the first lockdown. Yeah, North Italy in February 2020. And of course, there are somewhat digital gimmicks, but I don't shy away from some using these drag and drop applications. And I think those tools allow us to take a new vantage point. And it's fun to experiment with them, almost like taking a digital approach towards notions of place. Specifically, I'm interested in the interplay of planned, intended, and weathered notions of time and use in regards of textured surfaces. Here on the left, the photo of the calcified crust of a 16th century fountain in Rome. On the right, a multi-layered thermochromic model, which I did right at the end of my master's at the Bartlett. The latter was actually a bit of an accident, since I bought the wrong spool of great 3D printing filament and decided to print a large model the night before submission. Well, when I picked it up in the morning, it was there shining bright white in the center of the big MakerBot, because it changes color when it gets warm, and the bed was still warm. So that material turned a bit into a fascination, and I got really curious about it. How about buildings change over time and the stories they tell us about the weather? Like the one on the left, the roof of St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome, the roof lanterns are clad with lead, and the water leaves traces while running over the centuries. On the right, again, a thermochromic surface, which does this instantaneously, sort of responding to the climate. Another gimmicky thing, I know, but I enjoy the implications and the way it allows us to think about the architectural envelope in relation to climate. In my research, I juxtapose those thoughts with existing thoughts on the role of material and color and ornament in architecture. Here again, we have Venice. It's a bit like the golden thread for this time painted by John Ruskin in the mid-19th century. A way how nature takes over and quasi-vernacular color scheme is achieved through patina, but also the actual close-up of material compositions like the striated layers of sinter in the ornamental incrustation of an interior of a church in Rome. Yeah, there's quite a lot from Rome, but I kind of like the color scheme. And so currently I'm part of a couple of research projects here. One is an FWF PIG project called Post-Digital Neo-Baroque, led by Marian Coletti at the department. And another one is funded by the Tyrolean Science Fund, which I'm running. The title is Thermochromic Topologies. And together with the team, so I have a great assistant, Catalina, who's helping a lot. We are looking into how such color changing surfaces can be programmed to highlight specific architectural features of situations. A sort of climatic ornament, careful with that term, but how can certain patterns be achieved through layering and carving of these porous surfaces? So it is about digitally designing an informed surface. It is a distinct reaction to environmental conditions, which is then digitally simulated using computational fluid dynamics. The information or smart materials are then strategically placed and layered onto a colored substrate to achieve a programmed response or even something called behavior. This, of course, touches upon an historic discussion on the role of color in architecture to meaningfully highlight features. It's not about what color or material is used, but how they're used, where and what triggers their dynamic behavior. This climatic approach to textures is deeply rooted in what architecture is often, not always, but often about, creating shelter and mediating climate. It is enveloping us in an environmentally performative skin and house, though it is not a hide, which is dead skin, but something alive. It shows its complexion from within. Since a while, I call this cutaneous tectonics. Cutaneous means off the skin, as a sort of working title, and it's kind of mediating display between inhabitants and environment. So with what tools do we operate? So to stay a bit in the framework of Rupert's imperfection, sort of all speakers tonight use digital tools for their practice and research. All the things I have shown so far are deeply rooted in a fascination and a conviction of their power to design. All the simulations are digital doppelgangers of material possibilities. They allow high precision and accuracy if rightly used, but I'm an architectural designer actually. I'm not a great engineer. I'm personally not even really good at maths, but they are a great source of inspiration. And I think architects often behave like that. We tap into other people's expertise and we make a mess. So two things I show here. On the left, it's the Reynolds number. It's used to predict flow patterns in different fluid simulations. And the one on the right is a quote of Friedrich Schiller's Wilhelm Tell, which loosely translated means the axe in the house saves you the carpenter. So the axe is a tool and not a skill. And yes, I could get an axe and I can chop some wood and I could try my best, but I doubt I'd be able to do anything like in that picture, which is the bottom part of a very large organ from the 17th century in Copenhagen, which I visited 2 years ago. And the photo was taken on a trip. It was actually a working trip with a very good friend and colleague, Matthias Banks-Dixon, back in 2019. He's by now also part of the faculty. And that was also the last time I had a close encounter with wood. We got shortlisted to build a pavilion for the Copenhagen Art Fair. We called it Snug as a Bug in a Rug. And we got money for materials and the scholarship from the faculty, thank you, to build it. With helps from some friends, amongst them Alex Moisey, who's also now at the faculty, we succeeded. And Matthias and I wanted to build an inhabitable envelope. We called it a hospitable wall. With the limited budget, we needed a method to build that complex surface at low cost. We came up with a strategy that used very few CNC plywood elements, which you see in the middle of the right picture. And they just give it just enough shape for the thin pine slats to bend the way we wanted them to bend. And the rest was entirely done by the natural elasticity of the wood. Of course, the Danish wood, which was actually Latvian wood, behaved a bit differently than the Austrian wood, which we used for testing. So we had to improvise a bit with water, but we again did not mind the imperfections. So the result was somewhere in between a digital precision and this inert material performance. I think reflecting now for this talk, Innsbruck and the views we have here also from the department definitely impacted my approach to all those notions of materiality and texture over the past couple of years. The visible harshness of the climate, which we can witness moving along the elevations of the mountains and so forth. It is something I have recently investigated in a paper and looking out of the window, which we, I guess, all did a lot during lockdown while reviewing the writings of Alexander von Humboldt, the great explorer. A topic we're currently exploring with postgraduate students at the department in the design studio eccentric ecotones is actually how we can design these sort of inhabitable spaces and niche spaces in such harsh climates. So to summarize, my work is partially about using digital environmental simulations as a base driver for design, not as an optimization, not to verify any performance. Together with computational design, bear in mind the previously mentioned axe, it allows to design complex shapes and forms. So how does this impact surfaces? How does it impact layering? How does this turn surfaces into landscapes? The precise digital, the creative digital, the fabricated digital. How does this articulate features? Is there something like an unpigmented polychromy based on weathering, patina, and responsive materials? Those are all issues I'm investigating in ongoing research. Before summer, I will kick off the next project called Procedural Sinters, which is funded by a needs-based scholarship from the faculty, and it will investigate the procedural design of digital sinters, their fabrication and their change over time when exposed to weather. Back to Venice on the last slide, or actually to John Ruskin. A few weeks ago, I came across this aquarelle painting on the left from 1871. The image on the right is a screenshot of a high-resolution 3D scan from Quixel, which anyone can download. Both are fragments taken out of context, isolated, high resolution. Nonetheless, the environmental circumstances that shape them can be read through their textured surfaces, somewhere between digital and material, between organic and artificial. So before I get lost in too many questions, and before my argument gets whimsical, I would like to finish and thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you.
So hello everyone, I think it's now my turn to share my screen. So let me see. Okay, my name is Mümün Keser, and as Florina already mentioned, I recently graduated from University of Innsbruck a few months ago. And today I'm going to talk about a few projects of mine and also my diploma thesis, and how my diploma thesis also shaped the way I designed recently. So to start the presentation, I want to quote Jan Vriemann. Why is it that architecture and architects, unlike film and filmmakers, are so little interested in people during the design process? Why are they so theoretical, so distant from life in general? So this quote actually not only just shaped my diploma thesis, but also shaped the recent works of mine. So from that, I want to go directly through my diploma thesis, which is titled Oppositions, Simulated Embodiment and Empathic Spaces of Existence. So the work consists of improving, modifying the real spaces we inhabit by simulating a virtual representation of that space. The static real face of our environments would coexist with the dynamic forms of virtual counterpart created by our personal contribution. So this process would then open a new window into a new reality, a new space, which is ultimately a hyperreal space that is not only between two dimensions, but also intertwines virtual and real spatial dimensions. So in this way, the architecture does not have to be in one form only, but it can adapt to the user and interact with us through our personal input. And this can lead to a more individualized environment that enriches or improves our lives by stimulating the users. So the simulations, or rather the virtual face, can be seen as a medium in their dynamic character and their constantly changing architectural expression. The project focuses on creating alternative spaces to improve daily life, especially for those who practice remote flexible working in the home office, or who is more of a flexible living guy. And if we use simulation as a space generating apparatus, we don't even have to go anywhere to free ourselves from feeling of being at home or on a certain place. And when material qualities merge with the immaterial qualities, we can create our own spaces around us. We can immerse ourselves in another place that still resembles the real one, but through virtual adjustments becomes a new simulated environment. And through mixed reality, with all this technology now surrounding us with VR, AR, or XR, we can merge the virtual and the real and obtain an immersive, interactive space that can help us to get distracted, take a break, or even if we have lost track, to regain our spirit. So for the whole project, I examined a lot of philosophers, a lot of theorists and psychologists and stuff like that. And one of the main dudes that I examined was Jean Baudrillard, and his dealings with simulacra and simulation, all this stuff go back a while. And since then, our society has logically changed as well, especially with the advent of smartphones and the parallel growth of the technological innovations. Our environments today are becoming more and more immersed in hyperreality, and this has changed our attitudes and approach to the media we consume. And our understanding of reality lies only in our own minds, and which are constructed by our own self. And nowadays, even social media is based on that. Hence to that, each one of us has its or his or hers own digital footprint. And these cyberspaces, or in this cyberspace, our behavior, actions, choices have been monitored, saved, and by their AI systems, algorithm processed. And since the boom, social media has been manipulating our minds by showing us stuff, which mainly focuses on our interests. So the tool we are using to enhance our daily lives is actually using us as tools, and our addiction towards social media is based on this data, where the AI behind it knows us better than we know ourselves sometimes. And it can predict our next action and thus create experiences that drive us more into using social media. So this is one of the reasons why I kind of use this kind of a logic of the social media in our architecture, in our architectural design process. So we are not only led into new frontiers now, but also forced to live in a world of hyperreality, a world in which we cannot distinguish between what is real or what is not real. So this is not a really big deal for us. As Michael Heim in his work, Metaphysics of Virtual Reality stated, the world rendered as pure information not only fascinates our eyes and minds, but also captures our hearts. We feel augmented and empowered. Our hearts beat in the machines. This is Eros. So Michael Heim sees our relationship to technology as some kind of a marriage. And so that's why all these manipulations is not really a big deal for us, because we don't really care. Once we are happily married to technology and live a life where we can do so many things in a short amount of time and be anywhere, everywhere, virtually or in real, we're okay with it. So the cyberspaces are an important tool in our lives today, and we cannot move forward without them. And also another architect or a theorist who also inspired me a lot was Marcus Nowak with his work like Liquid Architectures. And in his work, he stated that cyberspace is architecture. Cyberspace has an architecture and cyberspace contains architecture, which means as architects, we also have to embrace cyberspace, dive into it, and start creating spaces in there as well, or start creating architecture in there as well. So I took everything that I gained as a theoretical knowledge and put it into this diagram. And here, this kind of I just wanted to show how this kind of a perception of a space by a user functions and how I'm using these processes in order to create this kind of a hyperreal space as a simulated fusion, because this is mostly based on embodied simulation of a space, which helps us to emphasize with a space as a user. And, and this also kind of provokes actions, and actions shape experiences. With the help of memory, personality, and emotions, we can kind of create this kind of a stimulation or manipulation of the user. And also, for me personally, architecture should not deal with the construction of a building, but rather be considered as bodybuilding. Architecture as a body can be enhanced, has room to grow, and the possibility to free itself from the functional enslavement of the users. So it could not only adapt to the user and his or her needs, but it would also maintain a physical and mental proximity to the user. So from that, I ask myself the questions about what if architecture begins to be an extension of our body, or what happens when we use our existence as a bridge between architecture and body to bring those two things together. So the project is not only about relationship between real and virtual, but also about the search for new ways to implement immaterial digital qualities into the physical and material-based world of architecture. So the simulations, or rather the virtual phase, can be seen as a medium in their dynamic character and their constantly changing architectural expression. So from this whole idea, I created this kind of an algorithm where I use point clouds as an input, not just as a representation or simulation of the real world, and also not just for orientation's sake, but also for a point cloud is a data, and this data can be manipulated further. And here I kind of created this four-stepped algorithm where I first start to create this vector field, basic vector field, by gradient vector calculation of this, by density of this point cloud. Then I add personality type data, emotion data, and user activity data to create this personal space of a user. I hope the video works fine. So here is a quick movie about the whole design approach. So again, you can see the gradient vector calculation of these point clouds that I'm inserting. And this is mainly based on density of this point cloud. So the way you also create or scan this environment is also really important. Then on the second phase, here you can see the input point cloud. And here is the output of this gradient vector field. Then on the second phase, I introduce personality type data, where I use MBTI personality types. And this, I convert this data into vectors. And I also use these vectors as a starting point of each vector field. So the starting point of each simulation will be defined by the personality type data, as you can see in this animation here. And then on third phase, I introduce emotion data, which is based on the Plutchik emotion wheel. And from this emotion wheel, I extract two data types, emotion strength and emotion pole. And I introduce them also into the whole simulation or into this whole algorithm. And as you can see, I now get a few more simulations, and here is all the data that I'm putting into the algorithm, and the outputs are here. And on phase 4, I introduce a new data type or user activity data. And here I collect smartphone data of the user. And this smartphone data then just implement this data also into the algorithm. And at the end, I create this really unique simulation of the space based on the user. So this way, we have I kind of create this kind of a method to kind of reflect the user in the space that he or she is in. So the next goal for me was to create this kind of an installation to kind of showcase this whole idea into a real environment. And here again, I use as a base, again, this gradient vector field of this point cloud. And I put it into an engine and really kind of create the same algorithm in there too. And here you can see the parameters change. And with the change of the parameters, the space changes as well in real time. And here is the real space that I put into the engine, or better said, the experience. And here are some visuals how this may look, but also a video of the experience. Again, I can move a little bit forward with the video. And as you can see, you can change the parameters, and the whole simulation changes in real time. And you can also, by moving your hands, you can also change the appearance of the vectors, or better said, the whole lines as well, or better said, the length as well. Ooh. Sorry, I pressed the wrong key. So I also used the same idea to kind of for the final presentation, and I scanned the whole Hochbau Institute and also put it inside this system. And here is a showcase with some users in it, and you can really walk around everything. The accuracy of the scanned data is pretty good. So you can go around, touch things, you can sit on things, and really, you can sit on things and really interact with the space. And this space should be really a hyper space. You should kind of feel the reality and also the virtuality in it. And it was kind of interesting to see the interaction from the users as well, because after a few minutes, your perceptual systems adjust themselves into the space, and you feel really real, because the space that you were before you put on the headset is in the simulation as well. And so this kind of makes this kind of a contradicting emotion of the user. And the only thing what drove some users crazy was that I was talking to them while they were inside. So they were like, I can hear you, but I can see you. And this makes me kind of go crazy. And this was kind of a really interesting to see. So now I'm going to talk about a few other works that I do. So this was it for my diploma. So I also, during the process of the whole diploma thesis, I also experimented with this kind of idea of really much more interaction with the user and the space as well. So, or the virtual space as well. So I had this kind of tests. And I also kind of used, again, a real environment to create something different in virtual. Some, for example, this column, everyone knows this column, I think. And I kind of created this kind of a really uncanny column out of it. And again, created an experience where I used, again, this kind of a logic. And you can really go ahead, touch the column and this kind of stuff. And this, it feels real because you can touch it, but it is not. So you have, again, this contradicted feeling about it. You can also kind of activate some attraction, and all these particles or all this, the simulation is attracted to your left hand on a degree. So you can move around the whole simulation a little bit. And on some point, after a few moments or after a few minutes, when you're inside, you start to adjust to that. And this particle field starts to feel real on some point, because it's kind of feel like something smoky, or it feels like smoke that you can push around. And so it was really interesting to see how your perception of the space changes, or the feel of the space changes. So now I'm also more interested in some works that I'm doing now. Again, this was also the idea for my diploma as well. I'm using some depth cameras to also scan the environment in real time and create this kind of simulations. And here, an experiment of mine, as you can see, this camera is attached to your wheel, so it collects or scans the environment in real time, and it immediately creates a simulation on top of it. So I think on this view you can't see it, but I can just move forward. You can also change the appearance and this kind of stuff. And here you can see it's in 3D, and you can really, and the accuracy is pretty crazy. You can really touch things. For example, on the start, you can see I kind of pick up my phone as well, or pick up these kind of things, and the accuracy is pretty crazy. And you can see, I think, when the two images are side by side, you can see it, I think, better. I hope the videos are not that buggy. So I also scaled this whole thing up and kind of created this three-dimensional. I also used, again, the Hochbau Institute model here as well. So what happens if we also create these kind of spaces out of this kind of canvas? Like really in real time, you can create this kind of manipulation of this kind of simulation in real time, and we really access the whole space with that. And because of all these elements inside of the space, these real elements from the space, the feeling of uncanny and canny kind of pops up, and you start to feel some contradicted emotions and reactions. And here again, a few experiments in that way. So now, out of all this stuff, I also working on some further experiences. This is this out-of-body experiences. The first one was story. Again, I use data as a starting point. Again, this smartphone data. And here I'm mostly interested in how I can use this kind of a data as a starting point of a simulation. Like here, for example, all this collected data from a 3-hour process of going back home and again going back here and stuff like that. An experience that I experienced, and kind of use it in a simulation as a guideline in order to create these kind of forces, and out of these forces create these kind of images or 3D images. That is also animated, so you can see exactly the same data here. And now currently I'm working on this hidden face where I really center the user in the middle point. So we really use the body of a user. So these are now these whole projects are a work in process projects that I do in my free time because of this is some personal stuff. And for my, how should I say, for my personal experimentations, I do these kind of things like visually or digitally. So this kind of helps me to kind of see the boundaries, how far can I go, and these kind of stuff. And here is again, I use the smartphone data here on this object or on this 3D model, and kind of created this kind of out of these whole velocities that I extract from this data type. As you can see, I get the position from accelerometer data, and out of gyroscope, I get the velocity. And out of that, I create this kind of a simulation on top of this body. And this can be brought into a larger scale. And what happens if we start to create really spaces, virtual spaces or real spaces based on this kind of data, and use really this kind of personal data as some kind of a input, and not just arbitrary or designer-based parameters. And you can also scale the things up. So as I mentioned, these are some thought experiments, personal thought experiments. And you can really go further with this whole idea and really create intricate and speculative geometries. So thank you very much. I think I'm done yet now. Why is that so dark?
Okay, thanks for the three presentations. Probably what I will ask first is not to the speakers, but to the audience. Whoever feels comfortable to switch on the camera, at least we can have any vague sense of audience, let's say, and not just the names or black boxes. So as I said, yes, thank you very much for the three presentation. I think it's great because of the wide range of the different approaches of using, I would say, at large computational design or digital means, right? From as I see in Rupert's case, more oriented somehow toward the construction of, if you allow me to reduce this to the construction of structures, and in the sense that it is an improvement of construction processes that we all know that are extremely complex and difficult and messy. From Andrea's idea of also in today's climate crisis, what computation can deal with, not only in the sense of optimizations, as you pointed out, till Mümün's idea of how we can even use these computational means in order to create new sense of experiences and attachment to the body. So probably I will try to comment or ask and Rupert and Andreas would target it out directly at the question of imperfection. And I think to some extent it is also inside Mümün's case, is somehow if you see the question of imperfection in how we use digital means in architecture as a paradox, because we assume that the digital, and I think Rupert mentioned that with the maths, can give an impression of the contrary, right? But we are always fascinated in these clinches and the dirtiness of what a process or a logical process, how can it be corrupted, right? So again, I don't know, how do you see this, if you can elaborate or on this idea of the imperfection of the the digital as such. I don't know, Rupert, I don't know if you want to start, just because you have the micro on.
I can switch it off. No, maybe I see the imperfection in computational systems. Basically, it starts. I guess everyone experienced that with the question on how exact do you need to be. I guess it's a question of how we formalize the aim and what we are looking for. I guess every one of us knows that we believe digital, as you said, we believe it's a very exact thing, but architects always try to do the thing a bit abroad. I guess for my work, I just can say that although there is some imperfection also in fabrication, and all these processes, they generate some imperfection, but they require a perfect model. So every milling pass should be very precise, although you know before it won't be precise after milling. So the plate could go up, or so there's always something happening, just air humidity is changing. So I believe that the question of imperfection is, for architects, or in my opinion, for designers, allows design freedom. So I would say, not sure if that would be true for Mümün's work. It looked to me kind of, there's parts that are very exact, and then there's parts that are very vaguely described. So I guess this vague information flow is probably the thing that makes his work unique or possible, I would say, if that answers your question.
Andreas,
Is that going back to you, Gonzalo, or?
No, I mean, I said at with the camera off that my goal here is just to force you to talk to each other, not just reflect on your questions.
Yeah,
So
I
please.
totally agree on Rupert, for example. For example, in my work, I never tried to do some kind of a exact visualization of the data that I'm using. I just use the data as a parameter in my design process. So I just shape the data in my own way in order to get an output. So I think this is the way of a designer and architect in that regard. So we are trying to understand things in a way that it suits our desires. And we do that by really sometimes forcing it, or sometimes letting it roll naturally.
Is this a conversation where each of us now says their answer and then it goes back to Gonzalo, or okay?
No, I mean, we can take it as spontaneous as you want. You don't need to be forced to answer. So
No, but I think in a way, I think for me, this sort of, I don't know, this imperfection, at least how I saw it, was a bit this. That's why I put in this, like, this quote from Schiller's book, sort of like, it's, I think architects, okay, let's stay with that word, often I think are priding themselves, so we pride ourselves of being sort of the avant-garde of technological innovation, and we put things to use and so on and so forth, and I think that is all great, but inherent in it is that we're really good in appropriating these technologies and finding unintuitive, or for us very intuitive, that's probably our gift, intuitive things are not very non-intuitive for others, applications for it actually. And we then always, when it comes to the solution, we usually have to talk to someone who then is more well-versed in that actual technology, but at least we come up with the application. And I think that is a bit this inaccuracy or imperfection or this precision issue we have, is that we're really good in using things, applying things, but we're not necessarily the ones who develop the fundamental tool or use it actually to its extent in terms of precision, right? So
then in that sense, would you say that this question of imperfections is obviously rather a sense that comes from the idea of appropriation or misappropriation of what is supposed to be this tool, or the creation behind this tool. So this imperfection comes rather for our misunderstanding of what was the initial goal or the intention of the producer behind it. Or is it simply something that came out in our hands and we use it, experiment it, and that's all?
I guess it's both. I guess it's knowingly just finding new technology. I think, well, especially in our faculty, there's all these new technologies that we try to implement to design in many ways. And then as where the imperfection starts is, as Andy said, when you go to the specialist, and then in my experience, the trouble starts because architects are using very precisely defined words in a total wrong way. So everyone, if you go to a specialist and we talk from fluid dynamics or whatever it is, there's a big chance that it starts with a misunderstanding, because we think in spatial structures or in architectural terms, and they're rather different and not very precise for, I don't know, for an engineer or for I don't know, everyone who deals with computer scientists is probably aware of what we think how things are happening. They define it differently, and I would say more precise, but that is also narrowing their view on the thing.
So in this sense, and I don't know if you if you agree with that, there is, and I will connect the idea of the black box, let's say, or the shortcut, with what you called, Rupert, is simplexity. What I really like how you explain it with the grasshopper thing and so on. And this is to some extent, what do you think? The three of you, is this somehow the investment? I'm somehow coming again to the same thing. How much do you think that one should invest, let's say, in learning the tool? Many of the digital stuff has a quite tough learning curve, right? In order to somehow misappropriate, how much do you need to understand the tool you are having in hands, in order if you want to misappropriate it to some extent?
Yeah. No, but I think it's also, I don't know, for just to bring an example is also a bit about what Rupert said, but it's also a bit about, I don't know, file management or what we want as an output of specific tools. It's like for example, you will find various aliases of me probably in all sorts of fluid dynamics simulation forums all over the internet. There's always going to be the same guy who persistently asks how to get these meshes that are colored out of these programs. And none of these incredibly expensive and very sophisticated and very precise programs, very few of them can actually export that mesh out. They produce it, they can visualize it, everything. And usually the answer is like, well, why would you? Because that mesh is unprecise and you would not get any measurements out of it. And why would you? And in the end, there's a whole design opportunity in getting that data out of that program. And I think that is something you come up with a request to do something with a tool that it was not intended to do, or that actually the core user group has no interest. So you often come with an exotic thing. And I loved it when Rupert was showing this, what was it, over 40 meter long CNC mill in a way. I mean, okay, that has its purpose, but imagine like that would something an architect would ask, like, okay, why can't we do 40 meters? And someone would usually come and say, well, why would you need 40 meters? It's like, so I think it's a bit, that's a bit for me something very important in that context. It's about that you want something that the tool maybe is not made to do. And from that, through that, you can push then also maybe technological advances or so, like, I mean.
Okay.
I would just add, I think that like architects are maybe not, I don't know, I would call it sometimes blue-eyed. So we give things a try, so that, yeah, why would you need this long milling path, and then we would try to implement it, and then there's rather the question, why didn't someone do it before? Is it really a good idea to do so? And then probably architects are really like, what we're doing is, or what very often is happening is looking for a particular solution for a very particular problem, to trying to solve that as fast and as creative as possible. And then sometimes it leads, or it forces you to dig as deep until it solves your problem. I guess maybe that's the answer. You just, usually I stop digging into C# code in the minute it solves my problem. I will not make better code or something, or try to solve it better. I'm just counting on having a good computer that makes it accessible for me, and I don't need this huge computer power. So I guess it's just digging as deep as you need for a purpose that you define yourself, or try to define yourself.
Yeah, probably I don't know what I'm trying to try to find, let's say, or try to point out, is this a special moment that I think the three presentations somehow show, which is when you are not driven by the tool, right? So there is one moment where you jump into, it can be, in this case, we are talking about these digital tools or means. It can also happen with other means that we architects use in order to produce architecture. You need to learn the tool, right? And somehow you are driven by it. But there is always a moment, and I see in this moment comes with what we are calling here this imperfection, or this idea of the glitch in how we use or misuse these tools that we are having at hand, right? So this is again, and the three of you are also teaching something that has an extremely big impact in pedagogical purposes, right? So how much we should invest, either we or with the students, in order to learn a particular tool and be driven by them, and when are they actually, how should I say it, use consciously what they have in hand with a particular purpose that the project is demanding, or the idea or the motivation behind the project. So probably my underlying question behind all these comments is how we can de-appropriate or not be driven by the tool as such. So when the digital start becoming the goal, and we assume it the goal, the tool. I don't know if you will agree with that or not.
Maybe in the notion of like, I don't know, tools in pedagogy or something. I mean, I think there's a certain, in my opinion, this is a discussion, we can have opinions. In my opinion, I think there's an over focus on tools, especially on software, in a lot of discussions in architectural education. And for me, there was this moment when I was like, I mean, at the moment there's a huge run for procedural programs. So like Houdini is having a massive phase at the moment, which is amazing because the opportunities are really cool. But I just remembered, I think a year ago or so, there's an amazing, maybe Rupert, you know him actually, Horst Kiechle, who's like a German, and he does a lot on folding, actually building very complex shapes and how to turn polygon meshes into folding. And he then posted something like, I don't know, a year ago on like Houdini in the 90s. And it was something, oh, nice to go back to Houdini. Last time I saw it was 1993. And I mean, the photo I showed of me painting that egg, that was like just a year earlier. And it's sort of like, I didn't know about it, and suddenly it's around. And I think that is because some people pick it up, use a tool that is actually for the VFX industry, and use that in the context of, as Rupert said, this spatial understanding of architects. And suddenly it's all over. hasn't been gone, but that has partially to do with the accessibility of a tool, so making it more accessible for people who are not experts in it. But also there have to be these driving forces that everyone sees, and now it happens in social media. Students see Mümün's workshops and they're like, I want to learn that too, but simply because they see it, the tool has always been there. And I think that is also very important in that context. Is like that who sort of what do people crave to do with these tools? And it's not necessarily that when architects pick up a technology, that necessarily that is at the right moment when a technology emerges. It's the same with 3D printing and so forth. So it's usually only when the technology becomes accessible for us to do things with it and apply it. So that's an opinion.
Sure.
I would just, I guess can agree, but what I really believe is also applying new techniques. You need a project or a aim why you do it. Probably every one of us knows the situation. There's this new software that is just somewhere, and you open it. You I don't know. You write the viewport, and maybe you drag some menus, but you don't have a project for it or an idea where to go. Then you probably will never start to explore. So just seeing an image and trying to reproduce it, I guess it's not sufficient. I guess it's this playing around starts always, I would assume, with some sort of an idea, and even if it's just a visual or something you would like to do.
I mean, I have more. Sorry, do you want to go?
Yeah, I also want to just share my opinion on that regard too. For me personally, I just recently graduated, but for me, it always was also the tool was never in the how should I say it, in the foreground for me. I tried many different softwares in my student career, let's say it that way. I really, how should I say it, it was always project driven. For example, the last, I think 1 year or so, I mainly worked with, for example, Houdini or Unity. But for example, 2 or 3 years ago, I never opened Houdini because I never needed it. So I needed it on some projects and I learned it, and it was just that way. But my project at the end wasn't a Houdini project. It was just an architectural project of mine. And Houdini was just a tool to create this project. And I think a project shouldn't really have, or it shouldn't be driven by tools. And for an architect, we don't have to be experts in these kind of things. For example, I build up AI systems for my diploma thesis, but these systems was never, I couldn't do it by myself. I kind of copied this code from there and from here and so on, and kind of build it like, how should I say it, like how we build physical models. Like, okay, put this here, put this there. Oh, it's working, nice. I can now use it. But I don't know how it's working, but it's working. So that's it. So I think that's why we don't have to be experts in these kind of tools as soon or as long as we get the output. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I have more comments and so on, but probably it's also the audience. Someone wants to get involved, ask something, comment something. Giacomo, go for it. Take your time.
Yeah, sorry. Hopefully it's not COVID. Thank you as usual. And I have to say, I think I really like this session. It felt really like a conversation, or a faculty conversation, more than the other sessions. I think, I don't know why. Maybe I'm just more tired. Anyhow, I was thinking about because your work, I think, shows some kind of different degrees of and understandings of complexity, which I think it's quite a. I mean, it's the long discussions of digital technologies. So according to some of digital design, let's call it like that, according to some, digital design has to be formally complex, otherwise it's not interesting. Or the other way around for others. And I was wondering, what would be your take on that, in the sense that, for example, Andreas, your work, complexity looks like a kind of an aesthetic notion in relation to performance. And I think that it's really a shame that you were not selected for the symposium. Your work would have been a great fit, I think. And this is basically the reason for my question. And then in the case of Rupert, I also think that your simplicity, it's like this idea of reducing, if I can say these words, the complexity to one single command, right? To a simple input that kind of produces a complex result, while in Mümün, sorry for the pronunciation, this idea of craziness that you mentioned and hybrid reality. So like, what would be the role of complexity in your, is it an aesthetic factor, a technical factor to play against, as Gonzalo was saying, or, and is it really fundamental today to think about digital design or not?
Well, I don't know. I need to say, in my case, you've assessed it properly. I can agree. For me, it is definitely a. I would really say I would personally, I would not even see it in a wider context. And since we're now continuing sort of to have a conversation, as you said, rather than for me, it is sort of like, okay, I'm formally, aesthetically fascinated with certain precedents. As you see, my my presentation is also a lot about sort of these forms from nature and so forth, and it's almost like a requirement in order to engage with it, because I am interested in that formal complexity. Of course, I could go down and look at the principles of these shapes, and they're usually very simple in that sense, as a lot of things in nature. So there's multiple simple steps after the other. But I'm not interested in it. I'm interested in the outcome and how you could achieve that and recreate it. So yes, I would agree that even outside the context, what is digital design now, or post-digital design, or any of those, for me, it is a tool to engage with a formal language that I enjoy. And I couldn't do otherwise.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I agree. I guess, I mean, well, for Andy's work, I definitely agree. It's a tool. I think for what I am doing, it's more the way you learn how all these constraints need to get together, and then you start to, there's so many constraints, so you kind of need to reduce it in order to be able to still control it, and not and then feeling in the same time I have to kind of reduce also, because if you want to build the things, then there comes a set of material parameters, and I don't know, it's not building that way is not the problem. It's the problem the sheet you get, and then you start, okay, how do I make a big sheet? Does it make sense? And then you start to dig into constraint that you barely can influence, except if you would have a direct access to industry or something. So I guess the way I have, at least in the research projects, to reduce this complexity is driven because the more you want to do it, the more people are telling you, yeah, but this won't work, and this part is too big, and this angle we cannot handle on a machine, or so I guess the aim for reduction, as everyone, or at least I guess most people, it's a bit like driving a car. You have this handle, and then you have maybe gears, and then it starts. You don't need to know how the engine works. It's just maybe it was back in the days when you needed to know that. Now you're not even allowed to open it. So I guess this reduction is, I feel, my way to still be able to design something, or to have some design freedom within this amount of system that pushes you towards something.
Giacomo, I'm really sorry. Can you repeat your question, please?
I really don't remember my question at the moment, but no, I think the overall thing was basically wanted to be a compliment in the sense that there is now this idea that digital design should be like iPads or reduced to degree 0 or near 0 degree, and I really appreciate it. I try to wrap it up like this and leave the word to someone else.
Okay, thank you.
So then probably I can directly target you a question, Mümün, that simply because your work is more in that direction of, I would say, the expansion, probably in a more direct way, the expansion of how we experience, how also what we understand as architecture, right? Beyond, let's say, the physical medium or the mediums of representation. So in this case, you at some point, I think you said that the simulation is somehow also the new real, right? So that what we understand as architecture, again, is not just the physical environment, I think, as such, but you are interested in, is it ultimately, probably the question is this then for you architecture a mode of experience? It doesn't matter whether it comes from a build medium or a digital one.
Yeah, definitely. For example, for me personally, when I was doing all the research, what I learned was that we are already simulating all the time our environments that we are inhabiting. So, which means, or better said, let's phrase it that way, that I kind of use this kind of simulations that we create all the time based on our emotions, personality, and stuff like that, in order to create this kind of complex spaces. And for me, also, we are spending so much time in cyberspaces virtually, not in kind of space means. And I was like, how can we kind of merge these two things together by using really this embodied simulation that we create all the time in our heads, in our brains, consciously or subconsciously, as a parameter to design such spaces. And now with all the tools that we have access to, okay, they are maybe not that consumer ready yet, but in a few years they will. How can we use these kind of tools to really jump into that kind of space for a moment or for a few hours, or do some activity inside by using really your parameters as design parameters? Because I kind of find sometimes when we create something, or when we use procedural modeling or parametric modeling techniques, we use these parameters. Like sometimes it's sun parameters, or sometimes it's just random parameters or arbitrary parameters. I was like, why using these kind of things and not something personal like social media does? And yeah, so that was mostly my goal, or better said, my interest in the design process.
I mean, well, while the conversation is somehow running, and coming back again to the idea of this misappropriation or misuse of something that was not meant originally for architectural purpose. And I will reduce it quite straightforward, let's say, to some software packages, right? So you were saying that, or Andreas was also mentioning the idea of the accessibility in different moments in time, et cetera, but again, at the core of these softwares, there was not an architectural purpose originally behind, right? And I definitely think that this idea of the misappropriation probably came to the fore, the opportunities that somehow Giacomo was also pointed out, the idea of new aesthetics, new ways of approaching things, et cetera, et cetera. But then we have also the other way around, right? We know that there are, from a decade or so, let's say, beam modeling, right? What is supposed to be what came to be for architects. And obviously, everyone has their own opinion about that and use it in the right way. Even I don't know if there is a right way or not, but there is somehow an attempt to democratize, at least from the point of view of the build industry, or the relation of architecture with the build industry through these softwares, right? But we somehow see that in the creative process, this is not always that useful as it is. And we see in many, even in academia, right? So in between the academia and the practice, we see that it's very difficult to bring this kind of let's say, beam modeling as a way to, in the creative process. And then the question it will be, do you think that this is somehow beneficial? It should be a more investment for whatever the biggest industry to produce something that satisfies a more architectural necessity, or do we leave ourselves comfortably in not being curated by, let's say, the big software companies? And we are more into again, research, but probably more hidden zone of, like you were doing, Rupert, developing particular pieces of software through Grasshopper or open source platforms, etc., etc.
It's very difficult, I think, because yes, BIM is, well, everyone has his meaning to BIM, but I think what we lost kind of is with this BIM process, we lost a bit of space for creative new solution. It slowly gets there, I guess, with Dynamo and all these parametric tools that are now also part of BIM modeling software. I guess what we should get back, and I think, especially in Innsbruck, this is taught and sought by most people, is getting back the control of the fabrication. So I think if the step of BIM, I would say it's intermediate, and now like the designers, we learn, for example, with 3D printing or milling, there's processes that you can go directly to the machine instead of having I don't know, a BIM object that is the 3D printing thing. Or I guess in some points, I would not say that BIM is evil or something like that. I would see it as a chance to get control over it. I just think that we kind of need to educate young architects better to kind of conquer the system or occupy the system and do what they want to do and not what the system wants to do. And I think from that perspective, everyone who digs into software to do what it wants to do is on a good way to change these software companies, or because now they have to give us access to their tools, to their pathways.
Yeah, I don't know. I agree with Rupert. I think this the access to those things is sort of like, I think anything that breaks barriers is good. In that sense, I think anything that makes things more accessible and more collaborative is, I think, always good in essence. But on that topic, I just had to think. I don't know. Last time we used the BIM software, I have to say, is about like 3 years ago actually. But I did a CPD for the RABA on the future of construction. Don't ask how I came that about, but we were doing that in the office I was working at that time. And sort of the whole thing came out sort of like, is prefab the future? And then of course BIM came in all the time in terms of how much you can plan. And we looked at a lot of data. And in the end, we also looked at a lot of sort of like, went to not conferences, but sort of like conventions where there were a lot of like providers of solutions and fabricators there. And everyone was heralding BIM is the future. And when you get down to it, the arguments were always like, so much energy is wasted in the construction industry. It is the least digitalized industry in the whole world, but the biggest polluter, and so on and so forth, you find it. And it's kind of interesting that the one part of the construction industry that is probably the most digitalized, that gets innovated, right? So BIM then is sort of like, yeah, let's start at the architect, who he or she is already sort of fairly sophisticated in terms of like this exchange of data and so forth, well-versed. And that doesn't eradicate, it doesn't bring the problem. So I'm sometimes within my only criticism with BIM would be, are you really getting more control over in that hierarchy, or let's put it timely hierarchy, later processes? Or do these later processes get a stronger influence in the beginning of the design process? So I'm not sure about that. So I can't say that. I'm just saying it's kind of like an interesting thing when you hear people promoting BIM, what the arguments are. And very few of these arguments are actually something that, at least in my practice experience, were very sort of like, okay, that's a problem of the architect. They were always, and you sort of deal with something. And I wonder if that's really innovating the construction industry. But then again, I'm spending most of my time in university, so.
No, somehow the comment came from also, and I remember a couple of weeks ago or a month ago, there was in the scene or something like that, came news that 5 or 6 of the biggest architectural companies in the world were somehow demanding some BIM companies that they haven't been developed so far in the last 5 years, right? And I don't know, I was rather somehow wondering if somehow what you were saying is this an investment that has to be done again for the early design phases in order to somehow enhance architectural creativity, or create a more one line in between the whole process from creation, the production, construction, etc., or so somehow there was the thoughts behind that. I don't know if someone else or someone from the audience want to ask or intervene it is true. I'm always bringing these things instead of a conversation of a personal Q&A thing, and I don't like it at all. But is there any comment from the topics that we are discussing here from the audience? Okay. So in that case, I don't know if we can stop here the event. And I would like to thanks again the 3 of you for taking the time for not just the presentation, but also for preparing it, etc., and for the talk. And as we always say, Florina and myself, I hope that for the others, these events are just to know each other a little bit more. Now we also know how Andreas looked when he was a child, and definitely take these events as again grabbing someone in a corridor and keep on talking, or wherever things pop up in this discussion or in the presentations. But for sure there are much many that the ones we can cover here. That's been said. Thanks everyone also for attending, and hopefully we can see each other soon in person. So then till the next time in April. Have a good Easter.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.